Hello everyone, and welcome back to our part 2 on Yoshizawa Ayame, one of the most famous Kabuki actors in history, and my personal arguments about how her theories of gender influence the way that people who were potentially gender nonconforming could live in the Edo period. Now, when we left off in the last episode, we were talking about how Ayame's theories of gender were interconnected with the sex industry and the cultural context of the courtesan. To recap, she believed that the courtesan was particularly feminine and the most feminine kind of woman because the courtesan exhibits the characteristics of naivety and softness. I want to continue that discussion by talking about some of the ways that her theories were discussed by other people at the time. In her writing, or the writing about her, it's recorded that she was challenged on her acting style when it concerned sex workers specifically. So the character of sex workers, not the concept of them. She says, "Once, when I called to see Sinnamon, Sanpachi turned to me and said, 'I don't know how you will take me saying this, but I think it would be a good thing if you were to go to Shinmachi and see what the Taiyu are like. Their style has changed considerably in the last 5 years, and the way you play them is as they were 5 years ago. It is true that their ways are now considerably inferior to what they were formerly, but the audience are all seeing them as they are today, and I hear there's a lot of talk among them about whether the way you play them is actually as they are or not.' In reply to this, I said, 'I am really grateful for your comments, but I think that it is good for a Taiyu to be a person of superior elegance. If there has occurred so great a change within the mere space of 5 years, then they must have been of surpassing elegance 20 years ago. I'm really grateful for your excellent advice. I should like to go further back than 5 years and portray them as they were 20 years ago. It is good that keisei should be of the old style and somewhat fantastic. Tea-shop girls and bath girls should be played as over-modern. This is the only way to understand these roles.' When I said this, Sinnamon said he liked the use of the term over-modern for tea-shop and bath girls. Now, I remind you, Ayame was an iroko, a child sex worker, before he was an actress, clients into her adulthood. I do not know the specifics, but the phrasing of iroko and not an apprentice kabuki actor hired out makes me suspect that he was in a boys' brothel and may not have had access to the thoughts of female courtesans. Still, as a sex worker and trafficking victim, she would know more about what courtesans said amongst themselves than the majority of men at the time. So her theories about gender are clearly about the performance of social gender, a multitude of genders divided by class that can be arranged on a spectrum. The idea that you can land at the gender of a samurai wife by aiming at courtesan and stopping halfway is a kind of gender spectrum theory, with gender polarities arranged based on erotic performance. Of course, eroticism is embodied primarily in the courtesan because the brothel was the primary venue for romantic and love-based attractions at the time, not the marriage. The most interesting thing about Ayame's theory is that she did not believe in switching between male and female roles. She said that, for one who is an Onnagata, to say that he might just as well become a tachiyaku is to pile shame upon shame. One who says that he might just as well change from an Onnagata to a tachiyaku cannot help being a bad Onnagata. One who changes to tachiyaku parts and does badly at them should do well when acting as an Onnagata. And also that, if one who is an Onnagata gets the idea that if he does not do so well in his chosen career he can change to a tachiyaku, this is an immediate indication that his art has been turned to dust. A real woman must accept the fact that she cannot become a man. Can you imagine a real woman being able to turn into a man because she is unable to endure her present state? If an Onnagata thinks in this way, he is ignorant of women's feelings. If you are an Onnagata, remain an Onnagata. If you switch roles and are good at it, then you were never a good actor in the original gender you performed. So, there's a level of innate gender performance in this theory. You can discover that your gender performance is better suited to a specific gender through experimentation, but you also need to closely observe that gender if you were not raised in that gender. Ayame demonstrated this in his professional life. As he aged, he decided to try and play male characters. If the reviews are accurate, he had no talent for it. Critics said, "It is as if Nachi has lost the moon and all the flowers vanished from Mount Koya," receiving universally negative reviews, not for being feminine and masculine roles, but simply for being dull. And as soon as she went back to playing female roles, her reviews were fawning again. There is one thing I might push back on in the existing analyses of Ayame's gender. Even though she is recorded saying things like, if an actress were to appear on stage, she could not express ideal feminine beauty, for she would rely only on the exploitation of her physical characteristics, and therefore not express the synthetic ideal. The ideal woman can be expressed only by an actor. Now, nothing I could find of her words seemed to actually contradict the reading of her as a trans woman, adapting the technology of Kabuki to allow her to live easier. She is, of course, of her time, and her time did not particularly value women. The political situation she was in would not have allowed her to identify as a woman, even if the theory of gender at the time would have supported that conceptualization of gender. She speaks on the advantages of masculinity, but of which trans woman is still a woman. And even if not, trans people can appreciate their unique vocal range, their height, their insight into the nature of gender and the like, without that invalidating their gender. As I said before, being a parent who provided sperm does not make anyone less of a woman. It is interesting that she says that a woman cannot become a man, and yet she, at this point in her life, is living a life that, by all accounts, seems to have been full social transition. I do not think that undermines my feeling that Ayame has the biggest egg vibes I've ever seen. She was thinking of the inability to change sexes as an unfortunate reality of human experience. I know what it's like to have thoughts about how unfair the apparently unchanging rules of the world are, and resigning oneself to it. Setting your mind to making the best of a bad situation. It's very easy to believe to the core of your being that you have to do something that is antithetical to your own happiness, because you believe it to be an unchangeable law of the universe. Now, Isaka Maki, who wrote a wonderful, wonderful monograph on the Onnagata, argues that the residual masculinity in actors like Ayame contradicts the idea of henshin, or henjōnanshi, that is, transformation. I can't quite conceive of it as that. I might be missing something, though. Dr. Isaka has access to more than me. But if Ayame was able to socially transition to the degree that she did, and she conceived of gender as a spectrum where women could be both masculine and feminine and still be women, I don't know that someone assigned male at birth would have to renounce masculinity to transform into a woman. Non-traditional gender expression is always where gender is constituted. It's not surprising that Ayame developed a theory of gender to perfect her presentation of that gender on stage. She had a position that required her to think about gender a lot. Her words show a deep preoccupation with the fragility of feminine presentation. One must be careful not to reintroduce too much masculinity in a role. And that feels very real to me as a mostly cis woman. It's incredibly easy to be disqualified from womanhood. It is, in fact, something that unites cis and trans women's experiences. Feminine gender signifiers are, to a great extent, a matter of, in the words of Natalie Wynn, desperately throwing glitter spaghetti at the wall in the hopes that the light catches some glimmer of womanhood. If any woman, whether cis or trans, can be disqualified from womanhood for the slightest infraction, how much more so for someone who perceives themselves as a man performing womanhood? It was hard for an actor to create the requisite suspension of disbelief when it came to such a conditional experience as womanhood. Of course, Ayame would have to be ultra-feminine just to register as a woman. Ayame was careful not to play strong women, as fundamentally different to more docile women. The object of these theories is the character of the samurai wife. On this character, she said, to make a samurai's wife unfeminine just because she is a samurai's wife is bad acting. When one is playing the role of a strong-minded woman, one must see that her heart has some softness. And there is an Onnagata role of the wife of the senior official who appears before her lord and delivers a judgment in place of her husband. At all costs, this should be played without making her too strong a figure. To do so would be like an actor in the role of a male senior wearing a women's cap. This does not mean that just because she is the wife of an elder official, she should be completely at ease before a number of people engaged in discussion. She might be so tensed up that her whole body is shaking, but if an enemy should come and hurl terrible insults at her, then she should stiffen herself and react. When it comes to situations of this sort, a woman has more that she wants to say than a man. However, in this case, the play should be in a somewhat less natural style. Kabuki constituted femininity in a way that benefited the Japanese state. Kabuki always placed the female characters below the male characters, even if the female characters were the main draws once women's Kabuki was abolished. Ayame's theory undermined the growing trend towards the androgyny of Futanari-hira Onnagata and replaced it with a binary spectrum of gender. There was no formal theory of androgyny before her, but she also rejects androgyny as a goal in her formulation of it. There were some observations on what would now be called gender performativity that there are records of her engaging with. The example of a gender signifier is the relative gait of men and women. It is something that has to be made into a matter of muscle memory to maintain when you aren't socialized into it. However, Ayame thought that on this score, actors should focus more on what constituted better blocking for stage. As she says, Jujuro said that women keep their right knee upright when half kneeling, and men their left. And that is the same when they start walking. This is what he taught his pupils. But the great Yoshizawa told him on one occasion, when they were alone, that although this was in fact the case, it depended upon the look of the thing, and one should not raise the knee that is on the side of the audience. If one went only by consistency, it would not be Kabuki. It is probably good, after all, to make a mixture of half realism and half imagination. After that, Jujuro too considered the look of the thing. Ayame's successor argued that the goal of an Onnagata was to make admirers think, if only there were a woman like that, placing the desire for Onnagata firmly within heterosexual bounds. Ayame herself never moved into the position of mentor in the Wakashu Ninja system of pederasty as she would have been socially expected to. Either that is because, despite her fame and success, she was unable to change her position enough to become a mentor, or the requirement that she be a top would have gone against her performance of femininity more than marrying a woman did, and that would have compromised her acting. Onnagata are still included in discussions of femininity and female beauty. There's a common epithet used towards Onnagata, that they are more womanly than women. Fine. That's literally what drag is about. You aren't trying to be indistinguishable from women, you are trying to play a dramatic role. And this isn't a one-way imposition. When women were on the stage acting in male roles, they were actively constructing masculinity, even if their theories of gender were never recorded. Today, the Takarazuka Review does a similar thing, constructing idealized masculinity by women for women. Their construction of masculinity is bright, flamboyant, safe, and joyful. Takarazuka masculinity, like Kabuki femininity, serves the purpose of constructing gender through putting it in contrast to the expected gender of the people performing it. No matter her intentions or how she conceived of it herself, Ayame constructed a social space where trans women would be able to live in a way that is more comfortable and not raise alarms if they desired it. She seems like she could be very easily read as trans. Her theory of gender simply does not seem like something that a person would come up with if they had any attachment to masculinity as a performance. She rose from literal indentured servitude as a child to being the leading light in her field, someone whose words are considered canonical to this day. I even found a reference to her in Mishima Yukio's novella, Onnagata, as an indicator of the degree to which the depicted Onnagata character was conducting themselves properly. Ayame refashioned a theory of gender, of performance, of non-conforming life that was revolutionary in her day. While we don't have that much information about her life, what does survive is more than enough for me to say that we are deeply blessed to know even this much about her. Thank you so much for listening to me this far. And I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Isaka Maki for her excellent monograph, Onnagata, a Labyrinth of Gendering in Kabuki Theater, and to the recorded panel discussions organized by Hacking Hustling. They are invaluable if you want to learn more about how to be an ally for sex workers in your community. I personally learned about the concept of sexual gentrification from their second panel, Sexual Gentrification and Internet Sex Workers Built, linked in the description. Now, I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/dragonflyparade, where I put out extra content. These are whole other episodes of this podcast covering things that I find fascinating and relevant to the study of queer history. I have deeper dives into the work of people I talk about in the main channel episodes, as well as talking about interesting tangents and dead ends I found, so you don't have to go down them too. If you like what I'm doing here and want to support me finding and bringing more resources on queer people to you, I would be very grateful for your support. Resources on obscure queer history don't tend to be accessible for free, so anything would help me get off the ground. You can also rate the podcast, like the video, send me feedback there or on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at dragonflyparade. Tell me what you thought. Any interesting info you want to add to the conversation? Any ideas for future episodes you want to hear about? I want to hear from you. And it means the world to me that you listened this far. Thanks as always to Feifei for the wonderful cover art, and thank you to my supporters, Kuvi, Mike, Kathy, Lena, and Cora. Thank you again, and join us next episode to hear about the next person in the Dragonfly Parade.